We krijgen het steeds drukker en we gaan daar steeds slechter mee om. In Recharge Connect gaat Hidde de Vries op zoek naar hoe we slimmer kunnen werken. Laat je inspireren met inzichten uit Silicon Valley, de Formule 1, het Korps Mariniers en de filosofie. En krijg praktische inzichten hoe jij jouw werk en leven kan transformeren.
The most important thing is a mindset shift. We have been told this lie that we're powerless, that there's nothing we can do. And remember that you are far more powerful than the tech companies.
It's not that we're working too hard, it's that we're recharging too little. And in my search to see how we can better deal with this, I'm talking with researchers, psychologists, and I have a really nice guest on my show today. I'm very pleased to welcome Nir Eyal. Nir is author of two best-selling books. One is the go-to source for Silicon Valley, and the other one has a more wider audience, which is Indistractable, which really helps us to acknowledge and to learn how we can get less distracted and better focus in our daily jobs and life. Nir, it's a really big pleasure to have you here. It's been a year or so. As a start, could you run us through some highlights and lowlights that has brought you here?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me. So I'm what you call a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services that people want to use rather than have to use. And so I've worked with all kinds of industries, from healthcare to education startups to fintech to all kinds of products and services that look to build the kind of products and services that people use out of habit. I used to teach at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and later at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, where I focused on this research around how can we steal the secrets of the Silicon Valley giants, companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat, these companies that are so good at getting people hooked so that we can democratize these techniques to build the kind of products and services that all of us want to use, so that we can get hooked to language learning like on Duolingo, so that we can get hooked to exercise like on Fitbod. That's the kind of work I do professionally. And that's where my first book, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, came from, which led me to my second book, which is about the other side, right? Hooked is about how to build good habits. Indistractable is about how do we break bad habits to distraction. So Indistractable is about how can we control our attention and choose our life by recognizing these distractions, all kinds of distractions, not just tech distractions, but not exercising when we say we will, or not being fully present with our families, or checking email rather than working on that big project at work. All of these distractions that take us off track from living the kind of life that we know we deserve. That's what Indistractable is all about.
Yeah, really nice. I also wrote an article, I think it was from Fast Company, that really identified where you see these struggles coming with the difference between Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets, for example. And it was a really nice example of how these common programs actually use the things that you describe in Hooked to improve their programs. And we don't notice it, but they're there. And can you explain a little bit more about the Hooked model?
Sure. So the Hook model is a 4-part framework that takes the customer's problem and connects it with your product with enough frequency to form a habit. So it's through successive cycles through these hooks that customer preferences are shaped, that our tastes are formed, and that these habits take hold. And the whole idea behind the Hook model in creating a habit-forming product is that over time, by building a consumer habit, you are connecting an experience in the customer's day-to-day life, namely a negative emotion, that every time they feel, you connect it to your product's use. So when I'm feeling anxious, when I'm bored, when I'm lonesome, when I'm indecisive, there's a product or solution there that takes care of that problem for me with little or no conscious thought, purely out of habit. So when you're uncertain, you Google. When you're lonely, you go to social media. When you're bored, you check the news. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we're thoughtful about how we can create these healthy habits in users' lives so that when it is time for them to look for a solution, it's our product or service that they turn to with little or no conscious thought. And the beauty of that is that then you are creating a monopoly of the mind, essentially. You're not even comparing the competition, right? When was the last time you thought to yourself, ooh, I wonder who makes the best search engine? No, you just Google it with little or no conscious thought. So when you capture the monopoly of the mind, you have an unbelievable competitive advantage. And so from a business perspective, that's very, very valuable. And from the customer perspective, if you use a product habitually, that's where the value is really unlocked. So you don't really get the benefit of exercising frequently unless you make it a frequent routine. You don't really learn a new language unless you practice consistently. And so if we can integrate those techniques, that psychology, inside the use of our product and service, not only does the customer benefit, but of course the business does as well.
Yeah, and I remember the example where, again, from the Microsoft versus Google, where actually they started making the programs, the Office suite, more social, that you can actually share online, making it more engaging, those products. So that's really nice. In what way did that help create a problem in the form of distraction over the years? Because those programs have become more and more addictive, Facebook, Instagram, those timelines, whatnot. In what way was that the cause of a big problem?
Well, it can cause a problem. Any form of media can be a distraction, right? So nobody's, you mentioned Excel and Google Sheets. Nobody's getting addicted to Microsoft Excel. Very, very few people. There's no problem like that. Very few business people are building kind of product that they need to worry that people are overusing, right? Nobody's getting addicted to enterprise SaaS software. So the vast majority of businesses out there don't need to worry about addicting their customers. Addiction is a persistent compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that harms the user. So very, very, very few products do that. The kind of products that do tend to be media products, right? If you're overdoing it with something, then it can distract you from other things in life. Of course, we have other types of addictions, right? If someone's an alcoholic or a drug abuser or a gambler, they're not just spending their time, they're spending their money, they're spending their health, they're spending their well-being. But when it comes to media products, I think, frankly, I'll be honest with you, I think the problem is way overblown. I think people like to blame social media. They like to blame new technologies. Really, the problem isn't out there. The problem is up here, right? It's that we haven't learned these techniques to deal with discomfort. These are what these internal triggers are all about. A company can't get you hooked unless they know what discomfort they are attaching to. So if you can't help yourself but check Facebook while you're at the dinner table, I got news for you. That's not Facebook's fault. If you can't stand your wife and your kids and your husband for 15 minutes without checking your phone, that's not Facebook, that's you. So what we have to do as consumers is to realize that these media companies, whether it's social media, whether it's legacy media like the newspaper, the television, none of them will tell you when to stop. That's not their job.
Yeah. You mentioned the sitting at your table, you've got this discomfort, or maybe for your work, or not wanting to go to the gym. So the big problem isn't in the tools that we use, but it's more in our society, or is it that we're getting more anxious than earlier before? What do you think on that?
No, we've always been anxious. Human being, in fact, we've always been distracted. We know that Plato 2,500 years ago, 2,500 years before the internet, was complaining about how distracting the world was. The nature of the human condition, right? Think about it. Let's say tomorrow Mark Zuckerberg said, you know what? I'm shutting down Meta. No more Instagram, no more Facebook, no more WhatsApp. I'm tired of this. I'm pulling the plug. You really think people are going to start reading Shakespeare and Chaucer in their spare time? No, of course not, right? They're going to go back to what they've always done, watching sports, gossiping, doing all kinds of nonsense. That is part of the human condition. So people will get distracted no matter what. The difference is that now we can find distraction in our pocket, right? Boredom used to be a terrible part of the human condition. People would complain and write about how boring life was for them at times. Today, we don't have to be bored. We have entertainment in our pocket, and thank God, right? What are we complaining about? We have the world's information at our fingertips anytime we want it, right? We're talking right now through this amazing technology pretty much for free. It's pretty amazing. It's science fiction. If you would have told me this as a kid 20 years ago. So what are we complaining about exactly? We're complaining about this glut of abundance. This is the first time in history where we have so much abundance. We have more food than every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth can eat. So that means we went from 200,000 years of periodic starvation to now more people die of diseases of excess, right? Diabetes, obesity, than they do from starvation. It's the first time in history that's happened. The same goes with information diet, right? That for the vast majority of human history, books, information, entertainment was rare. It was scarce. Well, today we're flooded in information. Now, I don't want to go back to that time. I think this is the best time in human history to live. But what that requires, the price of all this progress, is that, guess what? We have to learn some new techniques, some new skills. Now, most people are not willing to do that. Most people just say, oh, whatever happens, happens. It's not my fault. It's Mark Zuckerberg doing it to me. And I think that's a cop-out, because there will be a bifurcation. There will be people who allow their time and attention to be manipulated and controlled by others. And there will be people who say, no, I will decide how I choose to spend my time, my attention, and my life, because I am indistractable.
Yeah. Yeah, and is it then that because where we used to say, oh, I'm bored, now it's I'm busy, and is our brain adapting to that? Is it getting used to having all these distractions and more eager over the years to get that distraction?
It can be. It's whatever you feed, right? So whatever your brain attaches. So let's back up here. What motivates human beings? What is the nature of human motivation? Most people will tell you that human motivation is about carrots and sticks, right? We've all heard this metaphor, right? It's about pain and pleasure. Turns out that's not exactly right. You saw The Matrix, right? You saw that movie, The Matrix?
Yeah.
You know that part where Neo goes to that room and there's that boy with the spoon, and the spoon starts to bend, and the boy asks, imagine there is no spoon. Okay? Well, we're going to have that kind of moment right now. The carrot is the stick. Let me say that again. The carrot is the stick. There is no such thing as the carrot stick. There is only the stick. What do I mean by that? That biologically, when you look at how the brain actually works on a neurological basis, everything you do for only one reason, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything you do. Now, that doesn't mean that you need punishment. That is not the same. We're not talking about punishment. We're talking about discomfort. We're talking about some kind of small pain, some itch. Because if you think about it, even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations, wanting, craving, lusting, hunger, all of those things that get us to desire pleasure are themselves psychologically uncomfortable. So that means the carrot is the stick. The way the brain gets us to act is not based on what feels good, but the memory of what felt good. That's what drives human motivation. So that therefore means, okay, here's the big conclusion. If all human behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort, that must therefore mean that time management is pain management. Money management is pain management. Weight management is pain management. It's all about the dysregulation of emotion. It's about learning how to deal with discomfort. So what high performers do, as opposed to low performers, whenever they feel bored, lonesome, indecisive, stressed, they look for escape. They turn on the TV, they watch some sports, they take a drink, they smoke a cigarette, they scroll a feed, they look for distractions to escape discomfort. High performers lean into that discomfort. They welcome it. They use it as rocket fuel to propel them towards traction rather than trying to escape it with distraction.
And I think you had a post on this just recently as well, that if you're working and then you have that discomfort, oh, I need to check my email or I want to check my WhatsApp, that's literally that discomfort that you're talking about. You're in that project, you get kind of this internal or external distraction, and then all of a sudden you want to do something else and you justify it by saying, oh, I need to, you give it a reason, right?
That's right. And we know, in fact, that only 10% of the time that we get distracted, 10% of the time we check our phone, is it because of a ping, ding, or ring, right? Some kind of external trigger. That's only 10% of the time. So, of course, it accounts for some share, but only 10%. 90% of the time that we check our devices, 90% of the time that we get distracted, it's not because of what's happening outside of us. It's because of what we're feeling inside of us. And so that is the big lesson of Indistractable, and why the conventional techniques of just get rid of your phone, stop using social media, that stuff doesn't work unless you first and foremost understand why you are trying to escape these uncomfortable sensations in the first place. If you don't know why you're escaping these uncomfortable sensations, whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, you are always going to find the distraction that you're looking for, if you don't look at the root cause of the problem, which is always an emotion dysregulation problem.
And how does that work then for new generations? Is it something that becomes worse? Because everybody's complaining about Gen Z and they're always on their phone and it makes them so distracted. But is that different, or are they just used to using these devices in different ways? And do they even more need to kind of get to learn
generation, right?
Yeah.
We know from thousands of years of history, people literally, right? The ancient Greeks complained about how the young people these days, they're running amok. So every generation has this moral panic that, oh, the kids these days. And when I was a kid, it was when they called us couch potatoes because we watched too much TV. And before that, it was rap music. And before that, it was rock and roll. And before that, it was comic books. And before that, the bicycle. All these things, people freaked out and said, oh, these terrible new technologies are killing our kids and driving them crazy. So we need to pump the brakes a little bit and realize this is just part of what old people do. We complain about young people and how they're all screwed. Turns out that today is the safest time in human history to be a kid. It's never been safer. Did you know that? That crime among children, record lows. Truancy, record lows. Teen pregnancy, record lows. Drunk driving, record lows. Drug use, record lows. Homicide, record lows. Everything is at record lows. Why would that be? The only thing that's not at a record lows is we've had an uptick in suicide among girls. Okay, that is happening, and we can talk about that. And I think what's going on is that we only hear about the bad stuff. But if you wanted to create a device to keep kids safe at home and off the streets during this very critical period of teenage years that are known to be very dangerous, where kids do some very stupid things that get them hurt or incarcerated, if you wanted to invent a device to keep them safe, video games and social media may not be that bad, right? Compared to what, right? That remember, technology doesn't solve problems. Technology gives us better problems. So when I was growing up, when I was in high school, there was somebody who was involved in a drunk driving accident at my high school almost every weekend. Almost every weekend, somebody got into some kind of drug or alcohol related problem. Those rates are way, 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 way down. Right? So I would much rather have a kid struggling with bullying, if I had to choose, with online harassment, which is terrible, but fixable, versus a dead kid who got into some kind of accident from drunk driving. So I'm not saying that these tools don't cause new problems. That's what every technology does, right? If you think about what the genius philosopher Paul Virilio said, he said, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. Every new technology is going to come with pros and cons. The problem is that the old people, with our closed minds, we say, when I was a kid, we didn't have that technology, so all of the problems that kids have must be caused by this technology, which is stupid. It's very closed-minded, because these technologies also have amazing benefits. So the solution isn't to stop using the product. It's not to ban the product. We make the product better, right? Did we stop sailing ships? Of course not. We sail more ships than ever before. What do? We made ships safer. So now you almost never hear of a ship sinking. That's very, very rare. So that's what we have to do. We have to adopt new technologies to fix the last generation of technologies, as well as individuals, we need to adapt our behaviors so that we can deal with these new problems that are caused. So that's what the book Indistractable seeks to do. Yeah. Instead of waiting for the tech companies to fix this, they're not going to fix it. Instead of waiting for the geniuses in government to fix it, they're incompetent. They're not going to fix it either. They usually mess everything up with their ham-fisted legislation. I call out to us as individuals to say, hey, wait a minute. There's a lot that we can do. Why would we wait? Why would we raise children who don't know how to use this technology in a healthy manner? Just like my daughter. My daughter's 15. She uses social media, but she uses it in a way that serves her rather than hurts her.
Yeah, really nice. So instead of blaming and framing the tech companies, we should actually take our own responsibility and make sure that we teach our children as well as ourselves, but how to use these tools to a more healthy situation.
And the good news is it's not that hard, right? My book is not that long. There's lots of techniques you can use out there that not only benefit, it's tech focused, but it's not exclusive to that, right? Like I said, people have been distracted by all kinds of things. So anything that takes you away from what you going to do in my book is a distraction. So what I want to help people do is to have a tech positive approach to this. If you want to play video games all day, if that's your life calling, why is watching golf on TV somehow morally superior to playing video games? I don't know. It's the same thing to me. It's all both. If that's how you want to spend your time, great, do it, enjoy it. We shouldn't morally judge people based on how they spend their time, but I want people to do it with intent. If you want to watch videos on YouTube and play video games all day, great, but do it according to your schedule and your values, not someone else's, certainly not the tech companies.
Yeah, and I want to go into a little bit more of the practical tips and tricks that you have, because
Sure.
one thing that I found is that we have some mutual friends, and pretty much all of them, to an extent, use different techniques that you describe in your book, because they become aware of what they're doing and how they're dealing with their social media and their tech and other things, going to the gym, whatever. And they kind of incorporate these things because they know how it works. So really knowing how these systems work will enable you to kind of deal with them better, right?
Right.
It's just before we go in there, you've been a behavioral engineer. You've graduated from Stanford. You had an online advertising company, if I'm correct. So you were first on the foresight of writing Hooked. What brought you to write Indistractable in the first place? Because it sounds counterintuitive, right? You're the go-to source. You've written the go-to source to get people hooked. So what made you write Indistractable?
So it's different products, right? So we want to get people hooked to an exercise app like Fitbod. We want to get hooked to Duolingo so we can learn a new language. We want to use software that can help improve our lives, that can make us happier, healthier, more connected. That's great. We want those healthy habits, right? But we also want to disconnect from the bad habits. Not the same product. Not the same product. That's the big misunderstanding. People think like I'm writing hooked and unhooked. No. We want to get hooked to some things, and we want to be indistractable so that we can not have the bad habits to other things, right? Like too much news, too much booze, too much social media, whatever. So for me, it was a struggle in my own life that, I write books that I need. And so when I have a problem and I look at other people's books and I try and implement them, that's exactly what I did, right? I read these professors' books about who were telling me, stop using social media, stop using email, and say no to your boss. What kind of stupid advice is that? That's the kind of advice that only a tenured professor could give. Say no to your boss. I mean, we hear this all the time. If you just want to stay focused, tell people no. If you tell your boss no, you're going to get fired. That's dumb, right? If you stop using email, you won't have a career in this day and age. If you teach your kids technology is evil, it's melting your brain, your kid's not going to have a job in the next 20, 30 years when they go into the employment market. Every job is going to need technological fluency. So I tried many of these books and techniques, even getting rid of my technology, and they didn't work because, I actually even got a flip phone from Alibaba, those kind without an internet connection, the old school style from the 1990s. And I'd said, okay, no more apps, no more internet. And I would say, okay, now I'm just going to focus. I'm just going to write. But there's that book on the shelf I've been meaning to finish up. Or, you know what, let me just clean up my desk, or let me just take out the trash. And I kept getting distracted. So that's when I knew the problem is much deeper than just blaming our technology. We have to go into the psychology of why we get distracted. And so I wanted to fix this problem for me because I felt crazy distracted, right? I would say I was going to exercise, but I wouldn't. I said I was going to eat right, but I didn't. I said I was going to work on that big project, but I would procrastinate. And so for me, I wanted to really start from first principles. And I realized that a lot of the advice that we hear out there is unsupported junk, right? To-do lists, right? We all know, if you want to be productive, have a to-do list. Do you know that to-do lists, if you use them incorrectly, which almost everybody uses them incorrectly, are one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity, right? So a much better technique is called time boxing. Time boxing is before
you go into how do we use them incorrectly? Because I think that's
so here's what most people do. Most people wake up in the morning, they look at their to-do list, and they let their to-do list guide their life. Okay, what do I do? First, second, third, right? Okay, whatever's on my to-do list. But the problem with to-do lists, the biggest problem is that to-do lists have no constraint, right? If you want, you have any aspiration you've ever thought of, you just add it to the to-do list. More and more and more and more and more things on your to-do list. So what happens? You get home from work, you look at this to-do list of all these things you still haven't done after you've been working like crazy all day long, and you look at all these things you still didn't do, all these promises you didn't keep to yourself, all these lies that didn't get done, loser. So what does that do to your self-image? What does that do to your psyche as someone who day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year doesn't do what they say they're going to do? You start thinking these stupid excuses like, I must have ADHD, or I must be bad at time management, or there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. It's this stupid technique we keep using that's broken, right? The second thing that's awful about to-do lists is that even when you want to just relax, you want to play with your kids, you want to play a video game, you want to watch Netflix, you're always thinking about all the stuff you still haven't finished on your to-do list. So even when you have leisure time, you can't freaking enjoy it. So that's why there's many reasons why to-do lists suck. There's one more big one, but those are just a few of them. A much better technique is what's called time boxing. Time boxing is when we decide what we are going to do and when we are going to do it. Psychologists call this setting and implementation intention. It is the most studied and the most effective time management technique, which means we have to plan out our day because if you don't plan your day, somebody's going to plan it for you. And if you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. I'm going to say that again. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you have white space in your calendar, you didn't get distracted from anything. What did you get distracted from? You didn't plan what you're going to do. So unless you're a child or retired, stop complaining and plan your frickin' day down to the minute. What's your bedtime? When were you going to eat? When do you want to check email? When do you want to pray? When do you want to meditate? When do you want to read? When do you want to play video games and go on social media? Put it in your calendar. That's step 2 of becoming indistractable. Step 1 is mastering internal triggers. Step 2 is planning your day. Now, some people are saying, oh, I can't do that. I need to be spontaneous. What if I get a call from a client? I've heard every excuse of the book. Suck it up. This is the best technique you could ever use. And it all comes down to planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And that is the only way you know what is traction and what is distraction for your day, which should include fun, right? One of the best ways to stop getting hooked to social media is to say, I only use social media from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. That's the time I'm going to use social media. Because now your brain isn't constantly thinking, oh, when can I check? When can I check? When can I check? I know when I'm going to check. It's in my calendar. So the first step, there's nothing wrong with taking things out of your brain and putting them on a to-do list. That's fine. That's okay. But that's where most, that's why I said they use it incorrectly. They just stop right there. And that's terrible. Because what you have to do is then put whatever it is you were going to do in a specific place in your schedule and then follow that schedule without breaking it.
Is this kind of an extended version of the 10-minute rule that you describe? I've got social media. I have the urge to go to social media. I actually do that at 3 o'clock. So let's leave it for now.
Right. Exactly. So that's the beauty of the calendar is that when you have a time box schedule, you can look at it and say, okay, that's traction. Yeah. And everything else is a distraction. So if you have on your calendar, play with my kids, play a video game, watch a movie, now you can do it without guilt. You can actually enjoy leisure time because that's exactly what you said you were going to do. So you're turning distraction into traction by planning time for it.
Yeah. And you actually have that space for yourself, that mind space to spend with your kids or on your work or whatever you're doing.
Right. And you're doing it mindfully because the point here is not to tell people do this, do that. I don't care what people do with their time. You want to play video games all day? Play video games all day. That's not up for me or anybody else to say. The idea here is to live your life without regret.
Yeah.
That's the idea, is to become the kind of person you admire. And so it's only when you say in advance, how would the person I want to become spend their time? How much time would they spend on TV? How much time would they spend with their kids? How much time would they spend on their work? That's the only way you can look back and say, hey, you know what? I'm proud of that person. That's the kind of person I admire. They spent the time that they wanted to on the things that were important to them.
Yeah, nice. Can you share a little bit more about that 10 minutes to help people deal
Sure.
with that internal triggers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 10-minute rule says that you can give in to any temptation, any distraction, whether it's that piece of chocolate cake if you're on a diet, whether it's checking email when you know you should be working on that big project, whether it's smoking that cigarette that you're trying to quit, anything. What you're going to do is you're going to tell yourself, I can give in to that distraction. I can do whatever it is that I'm going to do, right? That's fine, but not right now. I'm going to wait 10 minutes. And if 10 minutes is too much, that's no problem. Do the 5-minute rule, do the 2-minute rule. It doesn't matter. The idea here is that you are going to teach yourself that these things don't control you, you control them. Because again, it's just an emotion regulation problem. So for me, I've been a professional author now for over a decade. I've published thousands of articles, 2 bestsellers, and it's always hard work. I don't know what people are talking about when they say, just start a writing habit. There's no such thing as a writing habit because a habit is defined as a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. How am I supposed to write with little or no conscious thought? It doesn't work that way. When I'm writing, all I want to do is go check social media or email or do some quote unquote research because writing is really hard, right? So instead, what I do is I take a deep breath, I set my alarm for 10 minutes, and now I have a choice to make. I can either get back to the task at hand, get back to whatever it is that I said I was going to do with my time, or I can do what's called surf the urge. Surfing the urge acknowledges that these uncomfortable sensations, they're like waves. They crest and then they subside. And so your job is to surf that wave like a surfer on a surfboard. But most people don't understand that. Most people think, oh, when I feel bored, when I feel lonely, when I feel indecisive, when I feel stressed, I'm always going to feel like this. And so that's why they look for immediate relief with something that's a distraction and takes them off track. Rather, what you want to do is to say, okay, this is an uncomfortable emotional state. It's just a feeling. It's just an internal trigger. It will pass. And so what I personally do, and there's many techniques, there's over a dozen different techniques I give you in the book. The one that I like, that I use, is I repeat a mantra. My mantra, you can steal it. You can make up your own. My personal mantra is this. I'll take a deep breath and I'll say to myself, this is what it feels like to get better. This is what it feels like to get better. And just repeating that mantra just a few times. And then when I'm ready, when that emotion has subsided, when I've successfully surfed the urge, I'll get back to the task at hand. And what you will notice is that by the time the alarm rings and the 10 minutes have passed, you'll be back to the thing that you're doing and the internal trigger has subsided and you're right back doing whatever it is you said you were going to do. And so over time, the 10-minute rule becomes the 15-minute rule, becomes the 20-minute rule, and now you're becoming indistractable. Now you're able to say, these things don't control me, I control them.
Yeah, nice. And there was this one thing that if you've got all this sorted and you want to start writing that book or those articles or whatnot, and you want to really commit yourself to it or to a gym plan or working out or anything for that matter, you also describe the pacts in your book. Can you share a little bit more on those?
Sure. So step number one to becoming indistractable is mastering internal triggers. That is the most important first step. If you don't master these internal triggers, they will become your master. Step number two, we talked about a little bit, is making time for traction, making sure that you turn your values into time by having a time box calendar. Step number three, we skipped over, which was hack back the external triggers. So this is, the simple kindergarten stuff like changing notifications on your phone, your computer. I only devote about one page in the book to that because that's kind of simple stuff. The much harder external triggers are your kids, your boss, your pets, all these external triggers in our environment that we can hack back systematically. Oh, meetings. How many stupid meetings do we go to that are nothing more than distractions? How many emails do we get that are nothing more than distractions? So I show you systematically how to go through each and every one of those external triggers. And then the fourth and final step is called a pact, is preventing distraction with these pre-commitments. A pre-commitment is when you decide in advance what the firewall against distraction will be, what the last line of defense. And so there's different kinds of pacts. There's a price pact, an effort pact, an identity pact, and I talk about all that in the book. One of the most powerful is a price pact. Now, this is something you do last, okay? It's the last line of defense. Don't go and jump into this technique first because it will not work. You first have to do the other three steps, master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers. Then, as a last line of defense, what you can do is to make some kind of pact. So many times, I work with people who say, I just can't stop getting distracted. I can't help myself. I'm incapable. Exercise just doesn't work for me. I just can't stick to it. I keep getting distracted. I said, let me ask you something. If I paid you $10,000 to exercise 3 times this week, would you do it? Would you go to the gym 3 times this week if I paid you $10,000 to go to the gym? Yeah, I think I would. Okay, let me ask you something else. Okay, somebody else. You know what? I've really been struggling. I can't stop checking social media. Okay, let's say I'm going to pay you $10,000 to not check social media. Can you not check social media? Yeah, no problem. No big deal. So all these things that suddenly people said, impossible. Social media is addicting us. It's hijacking our brains. There's nothing we can do. All of a sudden, they can do. We're just negotiating the price. That's a big deal. Right? Think about that. Ask yourself the thing that you can't seem to do. I can't seem to write that novel. I can't seem to spend quality time with my kids. I can't seem to work on that side hustle. I can't seem to get in shape. I can't seem to exercise. Okay, put a price to it. What would happen if the price was ridiculous? Would you do it? Of course you would. So that's what the price pact is all about. So how did I finish my book? After 5 years of consistently getting distracted. You ask, why did I write Indistractable? It's because it took me 5 years to write this book because I kept getting distracted. It wasn't until I learned these techniques, did the research, that it changed my life. And one of the techniques I used to finish the book was that I made a bet with my buddy Mark. I said, if I don't finish this manuscript by January 1st, I will pay you $10,000. Now, people pay writing coaches and exercise coaches and all kinds of coaches a ton of money right? That's gone. That's out the window. That's burned. And yet here I kept my money and I finished my manuscript because I wasn't about to let him win the $10,000. So I got both. I didn't lose my $10,000 and I finished my book. So that's one example of a pack that you can use to make sure you do what you say you're going to do. But again, really big warning here. It only works if you've done the first 3 steps. If you haven't dealt with the emotions, if I didn't have that toolkit of how do I deal with that emotional discomfort causing me to get distracted, the bet wouldn't work. I would have lost the money.
Yeah. So your and I really like, and I know there's a lot more tips and tricks in the book as well, but your main goal, your main shout out is actually that we are going to get more distracted. There's AI coming, so the algorithms will become better. There's more temptation coming our way. So the more we want to be able to deal with this, we need to really know how to deal with this for ourselves. We really need to know how to stand our grounds towards all these tools and everything. Is there anything that you're thinking of?
Teach our kids. I think that's just as important. I think the world is going to become a potentially more distracting place unless you know these skills. If you plan ahead, if you prepare for this, there's no distraction you can't overcome. It's that many people just walk into life without considering how important this is. And this is the skill of the century. This is the macro skill, right? If you can't sustain your attention long enough to read a book, well, then you're not going to learn all the amazing things that are in the book, right? If you can't sustain watching a YouTube video or a course or whatever it is, if you can't absorb information because you can't sustain your attention, it doesn't matter how good the information is. So that's why it's so important. Not only do we learn this skill, but that we teach the next generation how to become indistractable.
Yeah, definitely. I really like how you've built Hooked to make all the programs and all the tools and all the techniques that we're using more enjoyable, more engaging. And I think that's an essential part of becoming a good tool or creating a good tool, but then also an indistractable, really teaching us how to deal with this the best ourselves. Is there one last tip that you want to give, like a very practical thing for people to start using straight away today, even after listening to this session?
So the most important thing is a mindset shift. That I think we have been told this lie that we're powerless, that there's nothing we can do, that the technology, we just hear this so much. It's such a trope these days. Promoted, by the way, you should always, question the messenger. Promoted by media companies who are in competition with social media. Who tells you social media is bad? Well, it's the newspapers, it's the TV companies, it's the cable news networks that tells you it's bad, right? Because they're in competition because they're in the same exact business model. So be very suspicious of this message and remember that you are far more powerful than the tech companies. Look, I know every trick in the book. I wrote the darn book, Hooked, on exactly how they get you hooked. So I know the tricks. They're good. They're not that good. It's not mind control. It's not addiction. They're not, you're not puppets on a string unless you believe you are. If you believe you are powerless, it's true. As Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you cannot, it's true. So when we believe we're powerless, it leads to what's called learned helplessness. And so when people believe there's nothing to be done, guess what? They don't do anything. And so that's the most important lesson, is to believe in your own sense of agency, that you can overcome distraction. We can get the best out of these tools without letting them get the best of us. We can become indistractable.
It's literally growing a growth mindset, right?
Big part of it. That's exactly right.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I want to thank you very much for your insights, your approach, your whole idea and the philosophy around this. We'll catch up another time for sure again. But till then, take care.
Thanks so much.